Go ahead.
Quote, every day, 23 million land animals are killed on these farms, around 266 every second, end quote, Roberson. This quote comes from Claire Roberson's article, Everything You Need to Know About Factory Farming. Factory farming is the main meat source around the world, really including the US. It is fast and convenient for the producers that work on these farms to export their food, while some argue the process is not worth the cost. In my speech, I will explain what factory farming is, how it works, how it has progressed into what it is today, and how it can be a controversial subject. Quote, factory farming is an increasingly common way to raise animals for food, focusing on species such as cows, pigs, chickens, and fish, end quote. Factory farming, what it is and why it's a problem. All of these animals are the main meat source, and that is distributed across the nation into grocery stores. And in the same article it states, quote, as of 2020, there are roughly 1.6 billion animals within the 25,000 factory farms spread across the United States, end quote. This puts it into perspective how large these farms actually are, and that there are 25,000 across the world, so it does make sense that most of the meat that we get today comes from these places. Most of these farms are in the Midwest section of the country, so like right in that really red area, so kind of where we are. And that is for one reason being that there's more open space, there's not big major cities, so these big barns are able to be set up for the animals to be raised. And many people ask the question, I wonder where my meat comes from. Well, you probably get it from the grocery store unless you raise your own meat, which means you're probably getting your steak, your chicken, your beef, everything from farms like these. According to Andrew Smith's article, quote, today's CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations, produce an estimated 45% of the nation's beef, 50% of pork, 68% of the eggs, 36% of the milk, and 74% of the poultry, end quote, Smith 217, 219. With farms of this size, overcrowding can become an issue. The animals are put into barns at pretty much maximum capacity, and as they grow, obviously they take up more space. Producers do this because it is cheaper and more convenient for them to raise meat and, of course, to make more profit. Another issue with farms like these that producers have to deal with is disease. It's another issue because of antibiotic use. Producers use antibiotics on these farms because not only does it prevent disease, but it promotes growth. So like on this steer lot, they probably get antibiotics so they grow faster, which means they would be able to be butchered faster, which means the producer makes more money. And when animals actually do get sick on these farms, it's hard to treat them because they're probably immune to the antibiotics that they were probably already given. Quote, antibiotic resistant bacteria that arise on factory farms can spread to human hosts in a number of ways, end quote, anomaly 246, 254. This explains that the workers that do work on these factory farms can get sick because of resistant immunity the animals have. So now that you know a little bit more about what factory farming actually is, we will talk about how this part of agriculture has changed over time. So the early years on factory farming, and compared to now, it has drastically changed. Quote, in early America, animal agriculture was all about open space, end quote, Weeks 22:48. So in the late 1800s, sheep and cows used to graze on open pasture because the residents that lived on towns would let farmers use their land to graze, so therefore they got more food cheaper. And they really weren't in barns at all, which is a big difference between now and then. So I got all that information from Weeks. So then moving into the 1900s, farmers brought their animals with them as they crossed the Great Plains, which is basically where they are today in the Midwest section of the United States. And they realized that they could keep chickens in small spaces and they'd be more confined. So chickens were basically the first factory farmed animal there was, because farmers realized they could keep them in cages, which therefore meant more eggs, which meant more money. Along with changes already mentioned, technology was also upgraded. Quote, in 1900, agriculture employed 41% of the workforce. By 1945, only 16% of workers remained on farms, end quote, Weeks. Over time, technology has changed, not only with like computers nowadays, but also with farming. A big example of that would be milking machines. Just west of here, there's even farms like this where the cows go on like basically a conveyor belt, but they go in a really slow circle as they get milked, and then they go off of it. So this has taken the place of many people, which means jobs, because these large farms have this technology. So, but then like back in those days, farmers had to milk their own cows, which therefore was more time consuming, whereas now they just go on that circle and it's done in a matter of minutes. Quote, after World War II, various technological developments and changing social conditions combined to alter radically the face of animal agriculture and to model farms on factories. Roland 275-279. This meaning that it's called a factory farm, and it basically is what it means. Like, they base animals like a factory, so like conveyor belts, it's like a conveyor belt with animals on it to keep the process moving. This quote by Bernard Roland explains the change in farming going from a lifestyle to most, like in the early stages, to literally focusing on factory farms like factories. Quote, the total number of farms in the U.S. decreased by 50% 1960 and 2002, while the total number of farms skyrocketed. Factory farming, what it is and why it's a problem. This puts into perspective how the numbers have even changed. Like animals used to go from, or people used to have like 20 animals to 40. Now they raise hundreds in these barns. Quote, factory farms represent the latest transformation of U.S. agriculture. Before World War II, crops and livestock came primarily from small, tiny animal farms that people owned, and they raised multiple products. Today, most come from fewer, larger farms that specialize in a single commodity, wheats. So now that you know a little bit more about how farming has changed, we will talk about the issue regarding this topic. This can be a controversial topic because producers think it's okay, because they run their farms, they think it's okay. And you have animal welfare activists that totally disagree. Quote, the practices that comprise factory farming evolved as a result of competition between farmers to produce commodities, mainly milk and meat, at a minimal cost. Anomaly. The producers behind the large corporations have the goal of profit, but at a cheaper cost. As you probably know, Tyson and Cargill are probably the more known ones, while animal activists are against this type of farming. Treatment of animals is often talked about today. Roland states, thus animals are forced into environments for which they are not biologically suited. Because the operations are used so expensive, producers are motivated to crowd as many animals as possible into the system, end quote. He makes the point that animal activists believe that animals shouldn't be treated like this, but there's still the ongoing argument that it's not really solved because they both have a fair point. In my speech, I explained what factory farming is, how it works, and how it has progressed into what it is today. And that it can be a touchy subject, especially for animal farmers, like people that love their animals. Like it says, scrap factory farming for animals, people, and the planet. Now that you know more about factory farms, I hope you have a better understanding of this style of farming, and that it looks way different than what most people think farming looks like. Thank you for listening.